Hey everyone, welcome to Reddit Readout. Today we are checking out People of Reddit. Story 1. Revenge on Pesky Loiterers. A few years ago I lived in a ground level, front of house unit. Weather was beautiful, so windows were open most of the year. There was a table in the front yard with some chairs. The house was shielded mostly by bushes/trees, but some folks around the neighborhood found out, and invited themselves over regularly to hang out. Could be a bunch of trashed tourists taking photos. Some kids on bikes for a place to hide smoking weed from their parents. The neighbor I hate upstairs who sound like a giant gorilla walking around throughout the day and night. His girlfriend chain smoking outside the window. All hours of the day/night, waking me up. My bedroom was corner front. My place smelled like a bar with all the drinking and smoking outside my windows. Anyway, a random thought that always made me chuckle is to put on Johnny Crash, Hurt, on the jukebox, on repeat at a bar. What the vibe would be like by the 6th run through. Moving forward, whenever there was a rando in the front yard, I'd stick my speaker in the window and start playing Hurt on repeat until they left. While I stifle cackling laughter. People were always gone by the start of round 3. TLDR, would ward off annoying neighbors playing Johnny Cash Hurt on repeat, via speaker in the window. Story 2. Nana was unimpressed by my grandpa's and eldest aunt's sudden aversion to bread crusts. This happened way back in the early 60s, and I was just reminded of the story I was told as a child. For some reason, I was never told why, near the beginning of the year my grandpa and Auntie Wendy, around 12 at the time, started peeling the crust of their sandwiches and toast and leaving it behind. I'm not sure if it was the waste or that Nana baked bread almost every day and it irked her, but I was and still am impressed by the level of pettiness this sweet woman did that year. It was no secret that Nana didn't like this crust peeling practice and proceeded to fill more than a couple of shoeboxes full of these abandoned bread crusts in their freezer. When Christmas rolled around again, Nana proceeded to fill both my grandpa's and my aunt's stockings full of these bread crusts with little more than a sly smile on Christmas morning. My stepmom was 4 or 5 at the time, and she was terrified not to eat her crusts after that. Apparently Grandpa and my aunt never left their crusts behind, never left the crusts behind again. Story 3. Teenage Babysitter's Revenge. I was young, maybe 15 years old or so, and would pick up the odd babysitting gig for extra money. I took a night for a household that was on my paper route. They asked me to be there on a Saturday for 8:30, and I arrived a few minutes early. The parents were still getting ready, and they asked me to watch the kids while they prepared to head out. They left the house at about 9:15. Before they headed out, the wife gave me some very specific instructions. I could have a snack, 2 Oreos on the counter. Nothing else. She said she poured a glass of milk for me and left it in the fridge. It was right next to the plastic milk jug, with a piece of tape on it showing the level. She told me she'd check it when she got back, and if I took any extra milk I would have to answer for it. The kids were okay, went to bed without any fuss, and the parents returned home at 12:20. Mommy paid me for 3 hours about 10 minutes after they arrived. Excuse me, but this isn't right. I got here before 8:30, and it's now almost 12:30, that's 4 hours, not 3. We didn't leave until 9:15, and we got home at 12:15. I'm only paying you for 3 hours. But I was watching the kids from 8:30. That doesn't matter, we were home, and you weren't in charge, we were. I took the money, and rode my bike home. A couple of weeks later, they did pretty much the same thing. 2 things are important. First, the wife was a neat freak. I'm guessing now she had OCD. Everything was lined up perfectly. One of the kids spilled his drink, and I was looking for some paper towels. The cleaning supplies under the sink were perfectly lined up. Same with the pantry, every jar and can was in a row with the label facing directly to the front. Second, this was in the mid-1970s, and all canned food had paper labels. So, the third time they called me in to babysit, they were late leaving again, and I knew that I was going to get short-changed for the time I was there. I was steaming. So I went into the pantry, and tore the labels off each and every can. All of them. She had a shelf for camel's soups, another for canned veggies, another for canned fruits, and I scrambled the unlabeled cans. When they got home, sure enough, wifey tried to short me. You know what? Keep your money. I don't want it, and I am never babysitting for you again. And as of today, I'm stopping delivering your newspapers as well. So if you want to read the paper, you're going to have to go buy it at a corner store. I stormed out. I wish I could have seen the expression on her face when she opened the pantry door, and saw shelf after shelf of bare metal cans. Story 4. Gum on my blazer, you're gonna lop off your hair to remove my petty revenge. Back in high school, a particularly butch girl's and her accomplice's animosity towards me was no secret, likely fueled by my unique charm, courtesy of ADHD. One fateful day, in a bid to amuse themselves on our shared bus route home, she and her mischievously bitchy accomplice decided to affix wads of gum to the back of my blazer. But little did they know, I'm not the type to take crap sitting still. With the element of unanticipated surprise on my side, I leapt from my seat, grabbing 2 fistfuls of hair with gum on my fingers. The tables turned as I carelessly glued the strings of that pesky gum right into their hair. The next day brought me a summons to the principal's office. It was there I discovered the sweet irony of justice, for they had both sportingly short haircuts as a result of their own misadventures. Story 5. Update Ash. Part 1. School started on August 14th, and in the halls me and my friends see her around often, and it just pisses us off. Mostly them. When rumors about me ending things over her, when we were friends, started, my friends all added her telling her to end things and things of that nature. But anyway, I promised I would keep her name out my mouth physically, and so far I've been doing good. I'm happy for her. She's having fun flirting with other guys and dated someone I know very well. And by I'm happy for her, I mean I'm happy we don't speak anymore. I always knew I wouldn't get to experience a real first kiss. Story 6. Got my sister nothing for Christmas for justice. I, 26F, have no problem with confrontation. I'm also autistic and don't always remember to mask my tone and facial expressions. It's like putting on your customer service face 24/7. Shit is tiring. As this is the case, I find that my family, overreact or disregard when I set a boundary or make what I think is a reasonable request. My sister, 31F, and I usually bumped heads, and because I'm me, I'm usually marked as the aggressor. I'm pretty tired of it, to the point where I won't bother masking when her and I bump heads because I'm seen as the aggressor even when I'm genuinely trying not to be anyway. More than a couple of weeks ago, I messaged my family group chat asking if anyone can send back the order I had made for my cat. I live over 500 miles away from them, and it was accidentally sent to that as it was my old address, and that I would send money for shipping. My sister said she would, so I Venmo'd her $30, again now more than a couple of weeks ago. A few days ago I asked if she had the chance to send it yet, and she said no, she's been at the house. She lives there half the week and the other half the week with her BF of 8 years. I've said hi to her when I called my brother to catch up, who lives at home full time, so I know it isn't true. So I messaged the family group chat asking if she could return the $30 since I'm going to be visiting for the holidays anyway. I'll just pick it up when I get there. My mom immediately chimed in to see if I needed money, and I responded with no, I just don't need her to send it anymore cause I realized I'm going there soon anyway. No response from my sister. We send each other Christmas lists to get each other stuff we'd actually like for Christmas, and I already claimed a few things on her list. Guess who's going to get an empty box with the note, your Christmas present is the $30 you chose not to Venmo me back, Mary Mary? If I'm going to be the villain anyway, I'm going to have some fun with it. Too much? I'm probably going to do it anyway. Edit. The total for her Christmas gifts was like 28 something. My family and I are a cheap bunch. Yes, my sister has literally stolen from me before. My mom usually tries to cover for her by offering to cover for her, so I at least know she thinks it isn't right. My mom and I are tight, but she shouldn't have to cover for her 31-year-old. Story 7. A lawyer's petty revenge on an ex-client and his new lawyer. How's it going? It was Kurt. I didn't like talking to Kurt, but I couldn't help it. We'd been classmates in law school. Kurt had finished near the bottom, and I near the top, but Kurt was doing great, and I was really struggling. I told Kurt I was doing okay. What ya got today? He asked. I had a bail hearing. I was starting to do more contested bail hearings, because bail court was always packed, and it was a great place to pick up clients. You show up, fight for your client, and if you're lucky, you pick up another client, and on a good day, maybe even two. Just a bail hearing, I said. What about you? I have 5 guilty pleas, said Kurt, not trying to keep the delight out of his voice. Wow, that's great, Kurt. Kurt was a dump truck. Back in the 90s, that's what we called lawyers like Kurt, lawyers who knew no plea other than guilty. Kurt was going to plead 5 people guilty that day, and the legal aid plan was going to reward him handsomely for throwing his clients under the bus. He'd be leaving the courthouse a G-note richer in receivables. I've opened 20 files this month, he continued. Things are going really great. How about you? I'm doing okay, I said, and excused myself to do my crappy little bail hearing. I entered the courtroom and sat up front, waiting for things to get started, and while I waited I wondered why Kurt had so many clients, and I had so few. Kurt went to law school as a mature student, in his mid-30s when we started, but around 40 now. Maybe his maturity helped him. He had a hint of grey at the temples, but I had no grey at all. Instead, I had a decidedly baby-faced look about me. Maybe that was it, I thought to myself. Maybe I should grow a beard or something, make myself look a bit older. Then court started, and I sat around waiting for my client's case to be called. We didn't have smartphones back in those days, so I sat there and watched as the judge started to run through his docket. There were a few consents, an adjournment or two, a comically brief contested bail hearing that ended with a self-rep being sent back to the cells in a rage, and then it was my client's turn. I don't know this is contested, the prosecutor said, we are willing to grant bail, on conditions. I explained that my client didn't want conditions other than to keep the peace and be of good behavior. The judge sighed, and told the prosecutor to get on with it. So the prosecutor put the complainant on the stand, my client's ex-wife, and the court heard her tale of how my client had beaten her and tossed her down the porch steps at his house. When she finished, I got up to cross-examine. My client had told me a very different story about how his ex-wife went down the stairs, and some more things besides. I believe you have a conviction for prostitution? That's how I began. I have always liked getting straight to the point. Yeah, but I got a pardon, so it don't count, the so-called victim said. That was a pretty good start, and it got better when the woman admitted, after a bit of rough handling, to her chronic alcoholism, that she was excluded from all family events, that she knew she was unwelcome at her ex-husband's home, and the final kicker, that after leaving said ex-husband's house, she'd been arrested for drunk driving, and it was only at the station after she blew 145 that the cop noticed bruising, and she told him all about what her evil ex-husband had done to her. When she'd shown up for a family gathering. After I was done with her, I put my client's current wife on the stand, an eyewitness to everything including the so-called victim's drunken fall, and when she finished her testimony the prosecutor leaned over to me and said that he'd be dropping the charges. A pretty good result for junior lawyer me, but not really, because my client was factually innocent, and the prosecutor's witness was about as bad as you get. But still, I was feeling proud of myself. Eat that, Kurt, I thought as I headed for the door, eat that, you dump truck. I left the courtroom and headed for the lawyer's lounge to brag of my success. I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, and saw an old guy. I need a lawyer, he said. He was maybe 50, which to me was pretty old. I recognized the man, he'd been in court for a change of bail conditions on consent. He'd been hanging around waiting for paperwork when the court recessed. I remember you. You're the guy charged with destroying a house. I didn't totally destroy it. That was true, in the sense that the house was still standing. But he'd taken a chainsaw to it, and other tools as well, and by the time the bank got him out of there, the place was a wreck. The man hadn't taken too kindly to being tossed out for not making the mortgage payments. I asked if he had any paperwork on him. He pulled out the original bail conditions, one of which was to keep his paperwork on him at all times. I glanced at it. Charged with damaging a mortgagee's interest in a property. Interesting. Heard of that one, but never seen it. It's not fair, he said. I don't want to go to jail again. I asked him what was his prior conviction. That's just it. I already went to jail for this house thing, 15 days I got. The judge gave me 15 days last month. What? The man said more words, and then more, but his words were the scattered nonsense you hear from clients sometimes, the narrative out of order, the important facts buried under irrelevant nonsense, and in the end it took me almost 30 minutes to get the full story out of him at the coffee shop around the corner. But by the time he finished, I was excited. I was more than excited. I was seriously stoked. So let me get this straight, I said, the bank noticed you were wrecking the house with power tools when they came to check things out. Right. He was about to start talking again, but I held up my hand. And when they saw what you were doing, they got a court order telling you to stop wrecking the house. Right, and I held up my hand again. And after you got that court order, you wrecked the house even more, as in a lot more. I was pretty mad. Wouldn't you be, if you were being kicked out of your own home? And when the bank saw that you'd breached the court order, they brought a motion for contempt. Yeah, and the judge, he gave me 15 days. And I served the whole 15. No parole or nothing. That seemed harsh, but when I looked into things a bit later, I learned that it was true, and that some prison officials thought that the usual parole rules didn't apply to those convicted of contempt. That's pretty harsh, I said. Do you think you can do something for me? We made an appointment for him to come to my office later that week, and after our appointment and receiving his retainer check I started to dance around like a nut. I burst into Aaron's office. You'll never believe this, I said, I got a new case. Yeah? Said Aaron, the lawyer I rented space from. He was in his mid-40s, technically married but on his way to a divorce, and locked in perpetual mortal combat with his ex. Do I get a piece? He said. Aaron's family law lawyer was super expensive. I shook my head. Nope, I landed this client on my own. And you'll never guess how I'm gonna plead him. Guilty? Of course not. I hated pleading clients guilty. It was a last resort sort of thing. I was at court to keep people out of jail, not help put them in. So not guilty. Nope. I said. So you got your first insanity plea. Congratulations. Aaron found me amusing, and maybe a little weird. I'd been lawyering for almost 3 years by this point, but I had lost none of the glee that I'd started out with. I still haven't, after more than 30 years. Nope. You'll never guess. Guess what? Said Dimitris, walking in to join us. He had been promoted to Aaron's partner a year before, a big mistake on Aaron's part. That promotion is what started them both on the path to disbarment. I got this new case, and I'm gonna plead the guy autrefois convict. They stared at me blankly. I decided to educate them. Aside from the usual guilty or not guilty, there's 2 other pleas, autrefois acquit, and autrefois convict. You plead a guy autrefois convict if he's already been convicted of the thing he's charged with. When I'd learned about autrefois pleas in law school, I thought I'd never get a chance to do one. I'd never heard of anyone pleading it, it was just one of the zillion things I learned in law school that got shoved to the back of my brain as an interesting thing, but something that I'd never need. After all, How often do people get charged twice for the same thing? That's it, said Aaron. That's why you're excited? Because you're pleading this otterfoy thing? Aaron didn't get it. Neither did Dimitri's. When I got home that night I told my wife all about it, and she didn't really get it either, not being a lawyer, but she understood me, and was happy for me. Plus the $1,000 retainer. That made us both happy. The following month my client's case came up, and I was ready. I was stoked. I checked the list, and saw that I'd drawn Judge Herman, also known as the Hermanator, but I didn't mind. The Hermanator was a real hardass, but he respected good legal argument, and I had a good one that day. I walked into the lawyer's lounge and grabbed a cup of the shitty coffee that was always on tap. In less than an hour I was going to be in a courtroom. I was going to plead my client autrefois convict, and when I said those words, jaws would drop. Pens would stop writing. Mouths would stop moving, and all heads would turn at the strange plea, so rarely heard in a courtroom, and everyone would look at the lawyer who had entered the unusual plea, and they would say, "Who is this young lawyer, this new Robinette, this Greenspan, this Cicero, this? Hey, what do you have today?" It was Kurt the dump truck, Kurt of the quick and dirty guilty pleas. Prosecutors loved Kurt. Judges loved Kurt. But defense lawyers hated him, and he was barely tolerated in the lawyer's lounge. "A plea," I said, feeling smug. "Just one? I've got 6. That's a record for me. I only had 5 coming in, but I picked up another." "That's great, Kurt, just great. Kit's crap couldn't touch me today. I was pleading a guy autrefois convict, and I didn't give a damn how well Kurt was doing, or how badly my practice was struggling. I was in legal heaven. But I didn't enjoy Kit's company, so I left him and the crappy coffee in the lawyer's lounge, and went out into the hallways to find my client. I found him sitting on a bench outside the courtroom. We had a brief discussion. "What do you mean, you switched lawyers?" I said. "I talked to this guy," he said. "What guy?" He handed me a card, but before I looked at it I knew what I would see. Kurt Mandirick, the card said, barrister, solicitor and dump truck. "But why?" I asked. "Why would you want to switch lawyers on the day of your court case?" "I know the case inside out, I'm totally prepared." "We're gonna plead you outrage." "Yeah, about that whatever thing, Mr. Mandirick says he's never heard of it, that it's not really a plea. It's just gonna make the judge mad." Dump truck Kurt had never heard of the plea of autrefois convict and he'd infected the client with his ignorance. I tried to explain the autrefois convict plea again, but the client was locked in, and it's hard to shake a client who's locked in on some idiot notion. "Yeah, so Mr. Mandirick says he gets along great with the judges and stuff, and he told me I'd walk out of here with no jail time, for sure. Wait here." I abandoned my client on the bench and headed back to the lawyer's lounge to have a short word with Kurt. When I opened the door to the lounge there were a few of the older lawyers, the usual crowd. A couple of them were yakking away, another was making notes. Over in the corner was Kurt. I didn't want to embarrass Kurt or anything like that, and besides, even at that young age I had already developed a wonderful sense of tact, of how to handle difficult situations politely and calmly. "What the fuck, Kurt?" I shouted. Pens stopped writing and mouths stopped moving and heads turned towards me. Kurt looked up at me, appalled. "What the fuck?" I said again. "You stole my client, the guy who wrecked his house." The older lawyers looked over in disapproval. I turned to them and pointed at Kurt. "He stole my client right out in the hallway. I'm on the record, I got a retainer and all that, and this fucker, this dump truck, stole my client, and now he's gonna plead him guilty." "He wants to plead guilty," Kurt said. "Only because he's an idiot." I left the lawyer's lounge and headed back to where my client was waiting. I could hear the dump truck following me, and then Kurt and I fought it out in front of the client, an unseemly squabble, embarrassing really, especially considering that I lost to Kurt of the guilty plea, Kurt the dump truck. I was forced to admit defeat. Fine, I said, but I'm going to watch. Gonna get my money's worth. What ya mean? The client said. I'm keeping your retainer. You're not getting a penny back. Our squabble became louder and more unseemly, and it ended only when the doors opened and it was time to enter the courtroom and watch the Hermanator dispense justice. I sat there for an hour, listening to adjournments and pleas, and then it was the turn of my former client, and his new lawyer, Kurt. It was time for Kurt to work his magic. I watched as Kurt pleaded his man guilty, without negotiating with the prosecutor, without preparation, without anything at all. My client's a first offender, Kurt said, going on about his client's spotless reputation, about the client's moment of madness, his speedy regret, assurances that he would never do anything like that again. But this was Judge Herman's courtroom, and Herman liked to draw blood. He gave the client 30 days. The client jumped to his feet. But the last time the judge only gave me 15. It's not fair. 15 days for what? Said the judge. 15 days for wrecking a house. The judge turned to the prosecutor. I thought you said no priors. The prosecutor shook his head. Nothing that I can see. Well, said the judge, he's admitted to a prior, and I'm entitled to believe an admission against interest. He turned back to the poor sap standing in the dock before him. I was going to give you 30, but seeing as you have a prior, and for the same thing. All Kurt could manage was a feeble but, and then he turned, and looked at me as if for rescue. He mouthed something to me, and to this day I think he mouthed something like, what was that plea? But I ignored him, and I watched as the Hermanator gave the client 60 days. The client began to speak, but it was the same style as he'd displayed in the coffee shop, a spew of meaningless words. The judge told him to shut up and sit down. When I walked out, Kurt was trying to get the judge to let his client serve his time on weekends, but the Hermanator wasn't known for letting people serve time on weekends, and I didn't need to hear the rest. I went back to the lawyer's lounge and told everyone there the gory details, and we all had a good laugh at Kit's expense. When I got home that night, my wife asked how did the case go, the case with that special plea. It went great, really great, I said, and handed her a check for $1,000. And it was great, actually, because that day the older lawyers in the lounge treated me like a peer. I felt their respect, and that made it all worthwhile. That's all for today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.